Hey everybody, Simon Williams from Northeast Christian Apologetics. I am trying a new setup right now, and this is just a test stream, so I don't really expect very many people to see this, but nevertheless, I'm going to make it a productive stream anyway. So I intend to only go for 30 to 45 minutes. I have a new mic. Well, it's not really a new mic, but it's a mic that my wife gave me years ago. Now I'm going to be adjusting the gain on it occasionally. I want to see that whether or not this mic gets the same kind of feedback problems that I was getting on the other mics. And on the other mic, I want to make sure that these streams are, not low quality. I don't want a lot of feedback. The problem is that this mic is really sensitive, so you'll be able to hear me typing and tapping on the table and stuff, and I don't think that there's much that I can do about it, to be honest with you. Just seeing if this is better. If it's not, then we'll go back to the other mic. But today I thought that we'd be able to discuss the Leibnizian cosmological argument and some rebuttals to it or arguments against it that you're likely to come across. And some other interesting features of the argument that I think are worthy of discussion. So, just as a reminder, the Leibnizian cosmological argument is not that one. So this is the Leibnizian cosmological argument. Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Number two, if the physical world has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Number three, the physical world exists. Number four, the physical world has an explanation of its existence. And number five, therefore, the explanation of the physical world's existence is God. All right, so I already have a difference here than what I actually wanted to have listed. So originally, the Leibnizian cosmological argument is dealing with the universe. So I had already replaced the word universe with physical world in this argument. And that's mainly because you'll find that people attack the second premise because the universe could have another physical cause. So that's what they think. But it needs to be remembered that this is an introductory book. And here in On Guard, when Dr. Craig uses the word universe, he's actually using it to refer to all of space-time, matter, and energy. If it is preferable, we can replace the word universe with physical world. That way the intention is more clear, and this eliminates the physical causes of any kind since they are all equally contingent. So that is an idea associated with this, is that if you replace the word universe with physical world, then that is more explicitly referencing all of space-time, matter, and energy, and not just the observable universe. And so with regard to the physical universe being contingent, all of it being contingent, it seems to be the nature of matter and energy to be contingent. Insofar as that it could have been otherwise. And when you talk about physical worlds, we're talking about every temporal coordinate as well. And if it is the case that the physical world could have been otherwise, like I could have been wearing a different shirt, or that we could be using a different mic for this particular live stream, then it stands to reason that the world could have been different. And that needs to have some sort of explanation. So the whole world is contingent. The whole physical world is contingent if those things could have been different, and if it's reasonable to believe that they could have been different, which I definitely believe that's reasonable, that it could have been different. But the second thing that they have a tendency to want to reject is that if there is a non-physical cause or explanation for the physical world, that explanation doesn't need to be God. And this is true. It doesn't need to be God as the explanation for the physical world. It could it could be agreed that perhaps the argument is making too strong of a claim here. The argument argues for particular properties, and we can adjust the argument accordingly. So instead of using the word God, we can use we can say a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, necessary, independent, unembodied mind. So we are already addressed in when we were talking about the Leibnizian cosmological argument and this why it's necessary for it to be a mind. But yeah, that is basically what the argument is arguing for. And even if you want to remove unembodied mind, you can replace it with some sort of like supernatural entity or some sort of concrete substance of some sort. It doesn't have to be. It has to be non-physical though, whatever this thing is. And some people will say that it is a non-personal entity, like in Eastern religions and stuff like that, because the Leibnizian cosmological argument isn't limited to worlds that begin to exist. This argument is suitable for eternally existing worlds. But I will say that it makes it more likely that a unembodied mind is the cause instead of an impersonal being, because if we're to say that the causal principle holds and that an effect exists if the cause is sufficient to produce the effect, if the cause is equally compatible with several different non-compatible effects, then there needs to be some sort of something about the effect or something about the cause that can arbitrarily choose between equally likely effects that it can actualize. And that is better explained by an unembodied mind, a mind that has the ability to choose arbitrarily between equally compatible effects. Now with the rise of artificial intelligence and of these things, we can arguably say, or at least with computers like chess engines and stockfish, there are often times when moves are equally compatible or equally strong, and then the computer program needs to choose which move to do, right? However, we as humans have already established in the program which moves ought to be preferred, and usually it has to do with the library references or which was the first move taken into consideration when doing the calculation. And so when we're talking about a godlike creature, or godlike being, then we're talking about something that doesn't have these kind of interlocks in place that we have placed for this particular reason. And so it then becomes difficult to understand how such a being would be able to distinguish between equally compatible effects if it's not an embodied mind. So that's the argument for that. So with regard to that's about it with regard to the second premise. I decided to start with the second premise in order to really adjust the argument accordingly. The first premise also gets attacked a lot, and for different reasons. And the reason why I saved the first premise for last is because I also have problems with the first premise. But first, I'll address some of the concerns that other people have raised regarding the first premise. And a lot of people say that they don't think the idea of a being existing by the necessity of its own nature as being a coherent idea. So they have a big problem with the first premise in that the idea of the necessity of its own nature. And so the fact that something exists in all, so they'll say that the fact that something exists in all possible worlds doesn't explain its existence. The fact that something exists in the actual world isn't an explanation of its existence. Therefore, its existence is metaphysically necessary. It isn't an explanation for its existence. And so, in order to reply to this, it should be noted that we aren't saying that because this being exists in every possible world, that explains its existence. That's not what's being said here. That being's existing in every possible world is an entailment of its necessary existence. So the fact that it exists in every possible world is a side effect. It's explained by its necessary existence. The fact that it exists in every possible world is explained by its necessary existence. Okay? And so, it must exist, therefore, you will just happen to find, it's not that you will happen to find it, but it's just that you will find it in every possible world. In God's case, it is said that the existence is part of his nature. He is existence. Okay, so that is a classical understanding of Christian theism, that God is a self-sufficient being. He's self-existent. He is what is called ase. He has aseity, the property of being ase, which means that he's not dependent on anything, and that he exists by the necessity of his own nature. He cannot fail to exist. And some people have problems with that, but if you are to avoid an infinite regress, then you need to have a stopping point somewhere. And God is the least arbitrary stopping point when it comes to explanatory ultimates. Okay? So when people are like, why does God exist by the necessity of his own nature? The answer is because he is God. So it is by his nature. It just is how he is. And this is really hard to wrap your mind around, it just is the case that God is the way that he is. And that's part of the reason why I think that when God was talking to Moses in the burning bush, why God decided to give him his name in the way that he did, when he said, I am that I am, there is no further explanation. Like, God is who he is, and there is no explanation for it, or there is no further explanation. There is no need for an additional explanation to this. That is the explanatory ultimate. So I personally don't find this idea of in the necessity of its own nature to be problematic. I think that it's perfectly fine. My problem with the Leibnizian cosmological argument comes from the first premise itself, where it's the notion that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. And the reason why I have problems with this is for the same reason I have problems with the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument. And I think that the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument is a version of the PSR. And so what's relevant to the first premise, the causal principle in the Kalam is relevant to this PSR as well, in that the need for an explanation of something's existence is not we have to look at it in terms of whether or not we can say that chaotic worlds are possible. So if chaotic worlds are possible, then that would seem to indicate that the principle of sufficient reason is not valid. And so what really needs to be demonstrated is what explains whether or not chaotic worlds are possible. And so and what explains the principle of sufficient reason, So I'm going to read to you something that has helped me to really understand the problem that's happening here. And so it goes along like this. Hume, the classical skeptic with respect to the foundations of empirical knowledge, asked the following question. Since obviously you can imagine, that a thing which looks and feels like an apple should not taste like an apple, the proposition that all things which look and feel like apples taste like apples is not necessary. So a priori proof of it is possible. If so, do you have any reason for believing that the thing which you now hold in your hand will taste like an apple? Of course I have a reason, you reply. The reason is that similar things have always been found to taste like that. But then Hume would press you as follows. You presuppose, in other words, that that nature is uniform. Clearly, unless you have a reason for believing this general presupposition, you have no reason for believing any specific proposition that is, as it were, supported by it. But this general presupposition is not a necessary proposition either. If it were, then a chaotic world, a world in which what looks like fire sometimes feels hot and sometimes feels cold, in which what looks like mild sometimes tastes like milk, sometimes like orange juice. Worlds in which things that look like milk sometimes taste like milk, but sometimes taste like orange juice, and sometimes evaporates the moment it touches my lips, etc., would be inconceivable, which it is not by any means. What then is our reason for belief that it is true? Is it that we infer that nature will be uniform from the fact that it has been uniform? But to justify this inference and to prove the alleged presupposition of the uniformity of nature is one and the same thing. Hence, we beg the question, if we attempt to prove that nature must be uniform by relying on the inference from what has happened to what will happen. All right, so Hume is referring here to this is often called the problem of induction. And so what Hume is saying is that we don't have a justification for making inductions because all we have is evidence that the universe has behaved the way that it has in the past, and we have no real connection to the future. Since the future is completely outside of our ability to detect, then we're not able to make inductive predictions. And to me, this seems very reasonable. So what we need to do is find, and here's the problem. Okay, so when we make inductions and we trust that we're able to make inductions, and we do this all the time, whether or not you're a Humean or whatever, you definitely make inductions, and we live pragmatically as though they are valid. But what explains those inductions when they are actually hold to be true? And often they do hold to be true, like the universe does remain uniform across space and time. So what explains that? What best explains that? And some people take on what is called the uniformity hypothesis. And what they're saying is that maybe it is the case that chaotic worlds do exist, but we happen to reside in a world in which the uniformity hypothesis is applicable, and that the universe remains uniform and coherent across space and time. The problem is that you're seeking to find an explanation to make induction valid by something that has no explanation. So it kind of like cuts against itself, because if the uniformity hypothesis is something that you just assume on the model, and maybe you can say that you make an argument that it every time our inductions are verified to be true, that you are lending credibility to the uniformity hypothesis. But if you do say that, then it just demonstrates that you haven't really understood the problem of induction. Hume was definitely right when we say that we have to make the assumption on it. So you can either explain the validity of induction through the uniformity hypothesis, which is just assumed on the model, and so cuts against explanations, or it can be explained that by God. The universe behaves in accordance with God's will. Now, this doesn't mean that this doesn't solve the induction problem. Appealing to God does not solve the induction problem, because the universe behaves in accordance with God's will, and God can decide to change the universe whenever he wants, or interact with it in whatever ways he wants at whatever time he wants to. And so it doesn't solve the problem of induction, but it does provide an explanation for why the inductions that we do that become validated, it provides an explanation for why they are valid. At least in the same way as the uniformity hypothesis does. However, it also, instead of the uniformity hypothesis, which gives us no hope, it's just an assumption that we just take on face value. If uniformity of nature and the coherence of nature is explained by the will of God, then we can rely on God to maintain this kind of uniformity, or even if he does change it, that he changes it for our good. And what makes this better than the uniformity hypothesis is that it actually has an explanation, and that is in the will of God. And also, it gives us hope, because what we're relying on is the ability of the universe to maintain its order for our good. And if God is proving himself to be trustworthy, then we can rely on this God to maintain this order for our good. Or if he even changes it, that it's still going to be towards our good. And the evidence for God's being trustworthy is the extent of the uniformity that's observable. And the extent of the uniformity that we observe is ridiculously extensive. It is beyond extensive. So what we're dealing with here is a God that is extremely trustworthy. But if explanations, if the biggest reason for believing that that everything that exists has an explanation for its existence is grounded in the existence of God, then that kind of makes the Leibnizian cosmological argument circular. Because the biggest reason for believing that the universe, that the PSR holds, is thinking that God exists. And so that makes the argument circular. So that's a little bit of the problem with the Leibnizian cosmological argument that I've come across. Now, most people that run the Leibnizian cosmological argument appeal to other indications for why the PSR is valid, and Dr. Craig goes over that in his book. The thing is that it's always the looming question on whether or not chaotic worlds are possible. Oh, another thing about the uniformity hypothesis is that the uniformity hypothesis is often said to be like, chaotic worlds are possible, but the uniformity hypothesis holds for our universe. However, if chaotic worlds are possible, then they comprise the vast majority of possible worlds. And the reason why the uniformity hypothesis doesn't give us any hope is because even if it's true that the universe has behaved uniformly and coherently across space and time for as long as we've observed it, that doesn't mean that there are way more worlds in which a universe does behave coherently and uniformly across space and time up to this point, and then instantly go into chaos. There are infinitely more worlds like that. Just because there's so many more ways for a world to be chaotic than to be uniform and coherent. It's absurdly unlikely for the uniformity hypothesis to be true because it doesn't have any explanation. But once you go into naturalism, you're pretty much kind of throwing explanations out the window anyway. But that's not what people who are in sciences want to do. You know, like when we're in science and doing science, we're trying to look for explanations and that are suitable for making accurate predictions. So it kind of cuts against everything that you do. So if you are a person who thinks that the universe is coherent and uniform, then you ought to believe in the existence of God. So I personally think that even though the PSR itself is, you can't really use it in the Leibnizian cosmological argument because it's circular, I think that you could actually make an argument for the existence of God using the uniformity of the universe. And I think I'm going to work on that and bring it to people's attention on my side. But that's about all I had to talk about today. I didn't want to go too long on this, on this study. I just wanted to test out the new mic and see how it works. I wanted to and I'm going to listen back to this, obviously. And I don't know if I'll leave it up. Maybe I'll make a sharper version and put it up on YouTube. I don't know. But yeah. So, by the way, and I don't know if I'm going to be leaving this up, but I'm planning on starting a new book study that's going to be on tactics. And Tactics is a book by Greg Koukl that you can see on the screen now. And I have it here with me. So my plan is to do Tactics and read through Tactics, probably on Facebook or probably on YouTube, doing a live thing on YouTube. And I think it's going to be a good time. I have the paperback version. I read On Guard on Kindle on my laptop, but I also have Tactics on my Kindle on the laptop, but this is the 10th anniversary edition. I also, because I'm a huge nerd, have a signed copy of it. La 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 la. So, yeah, I expect that it's going to be fun. It'll be a fun thing to go through. And I appreciate everyone who supports this little ministry of mine. I really hope to be of use to people who don't have the time to or the interest to read these books on their own, and they can share in it with me. All right, I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble. All right, stay tuned for more information about tactics. All right, God bless. Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.